Isaiah, what is your story and when did you know that you were queer?
So I grew up in Southern California. My parents immigrated from the island of Tonga when they were both like 1918 to the United States. They actually met here in Utah at a young adult dance, and then raised me and my siblings out in California. I always knew I was kind of different. In the culture, we always had whakaletis, which are the Tongan term. It's kind of derogatory for gay men. They were always present. They were known for like designing events, decorating weddings, and very like active in all of the cultural things that I would go to. So I'd always see others that were like me, but I also saw the way that they were treated by family. I had a cousin who was a drag queen and now trans when I was a kid. So growing up, seeing them kind of figure that out before me because they were like 5 years older than I was very interesting to see them in the ward and to always see the love of family come first because they would always come with their family to church every Sunday, even in drag sometimes. And that really let me know that I was different than others, but I had a place in the world that I was in. I knew when I started going to school and was in kindergarten, I was finally exposed to people outside of the Tongan culture and the Mormon faith that I started to meet other boys and other girls, and I started to notice that I liked the boys, but I wasn't supposed to say that. I wasn't supposed to act on it or let anyone know. So I always knew I was queer. I just always tried to figure out why it was that I didn't feel comfortable or welcomed in my life. What about you?
I was late. So you said kindergarten for you?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that. I was 25 when I had my first like queer crush. It was a coworker that we really hit it off in conversation and met a couple times at a coffee shop and game night. And then at one event, they brought their girlfriend, and I like had this like, oh dang, like I wanted to be their best friend. You know, I thought it was something where I just wanted to be close to them, but when they have a significant other, that can get a little sticky. So then like months later, while I was meditating, actually like that moment came back to me and my body was like, you're jealous because you like this person. You are attracted to this person. And thankfully, when I came out to myself at that time, it was like, oh wow, like this is cool. This is really amazing, because before that point, I think it was maybe I was like 23 or 22, 23, about 23, I think. I had this day where I realized that all of my friends were demographically homogenous, which was fine, but based on my own principles, I didn't like being around sameness all the time. I really value diversity, but I just gotten lazy in my lifestyle. And so I started making friends who were different, including a gay friend, and we both love storytelling. And so we started having storytelling nights once a month, and he would bring his gay friends, I would bring my straight friends, and it was meant to be a space of kind of like integrated being, essentially. And in those circles, I started hearing terms like every now and then someone would share their coming out story, which was really cool. And I would hear terms like, wait a minute, that kind of sounds like me. Like there's a word for that, or, but I didn't think too hard of it. Honestly, it's one of those like, well, I'm going to forget about it kind of a thing. So, but thankfully I got to be exposed to the stories, to people, and I had the friendships that helped me realize how beautiful queerness is and how joyful it is. And so when I finally faced it within myself, it was a really cool experience. I'm sad though that it was like so late. It was meant to be, you know, you accept life for how it unfolded, but I'm really inspired by these teens that I see very often at Encircle or at my job at my high school who know themselves
Right.
or their queerness like 15, 12, 11, kindergarten. Like, I just think that's so awesome.
Yeah, I too am always envious when I see like young children and their like young lives very like proud of themselves, embracing who they were. I like understood that I was queer, but at the same moment I distinctly remember, oh, I'm attracted to this boy, but I'm not supposed to tell anyone I'm attracted to this boy. And there was always this fear that kind of always was surrounded by me. My family was very hyper masculine, and in the culture it's very that way. All my cousins and brothers played football, and I was the only one who didn't. And so I always felt very like I wasn't masculine enough, but I just wasn't as masculine to their extent. And then I was surrounded by queer individuals who were effeminate or in drag, but I didn't really feel that way either. Like I knew I was that, but I was in between, and I didn't understand why I couldn't find myself. And I too had to go and find friends, where I started to see myself in friends outside of my family and outside of the faith, where I started to interact with individuals that were just themselves and embraced me, and I didn't have to limit who I wanted to be around them. I could just be myself, and that really started to let me know that I could be queer in this world without being ashamed of myself.
When you mentioned that you had neighbors or family members who would go to church in drag, I was like, oh man, I'm so jealous. I would have loved that experience of seeing that, or feeling safe, like because someone else is being themselves. So
yeah, it was always one of my favorite things of growing up as a member of the church and Latter-day Saint was the reminder that families were forever and the importance of families. And that really resonated with the Tongan culture. Like, my mom's one of 16, my dad's one of 11, I'm one of 7, and our families are very huge. And so the faith really resonates the idea that what we are doing, what we're surrounded by is important and that we can have this forever. But it also was very hard because I didn't relate to the cousins that I had. I didn't relate to the football stars that were going to play in the NFL and that were getting scholarships, and I was just the kid painting the mural at school. And like, I was very artistic and very in my head, and I wasn't a physical person, and so it was hard for me to find that. But it randomly wasn't until I moved into an English-speaking ward where I was surrounded by predominantly white people, and then the boys that I was surrounded by weren't so masculine. And then I felt comfortable. I was in a ward that I wasn't surrounded by football stars. I was in a ward where boys were reading books and were like, Boy Scouts was different. It wasn't like a machismo thing. It was just a thing we all did. And that was the first time I started to feel comfortable in the faith, really.
Okay. So you said you knew you were queer in kindergarten, and what was the age or place where you were able to more comfortably, like, publicly say who you were and share that with family and friends?
I started to embrace my queerness when I was like 19, 20. I started to work and support myself, and then I got to the position where I was supporting my parents and they lived with me. And that change in the household dynamic really allowed me to feel empowered to do what I wanted and be what I wanted at home and outside of the home. And so I started to be around gay friends, would go to West Hollywood and Palm Springs and be surrounded by gay men and like this beautiful community that I didn't know existed, that there were so many of us and that they were beautiful. And like, it was wonderful to engage with these people and to make friends. And like, I was just in awe of this life that I could have that was being told to me as a kid that didn't exist or I had never seen before. And I started my coming out journey at 19 and started coming out to my friends socially. And then I came out at work at like 21. And I didn't come out to my parents until I was 25, 26. And it wasn't until I was engaged. My parents knew my husband as a landlord because he had owned properties and we had worked together on properties and stuff like that. They knew he was a friend of mine, and I moved here from California to Utah, and we went on a date, and I just knew it was it. And we got engaged 6 months after we met, and I called my mom to let her know that I was engaged, and my dad picked up the phone. And he was like, "Hello, son." And I was like, "Well, I was calling for Mom, but I just want to let you know that Robert asked me to marry him." And I said, "Yes." And my dad took a breath and just said, "Well, are you happy?" And I said, "I am." And he said, "Well, we're happy for you. And tell Robert welcome to the family and that we love him. And congratulations." And I broke down in the hallway of this hotel downtown, and like, my husband came out and he was like, "What's going on?" And I was like, "I just told my parents." And they were extremely welcoming to it. And it was really the change in my life to have my parents by my side as I started to learn about marriage, because being married is so hard. And like, having that support of your parents to kind of counsel you of like the changes of relationships and adapting to having someone in your life and meeting your soulmate. It was such a blessing to have my parents. They moved in like a year after we got married, and like, having my parents in the house with my husband was so wonderful to see my mom cook with him, and like, things I didn't know would ever be a thing. And like, my parents are still devout in the faith, and I just lost my father a couple months ago, and it was so wonderful to have had those moments where I knew that he was proud of me and that he loved me and he was proud of my husband, and that it really resonated at his funeral, where all of the family came, were so respectful to my husband and treated him like he was part of the kids of my father. And that was just amazing for me.
I'm so happy for you, Isaiah, that you had that
Thank you.
experience. Wow.
How was your coming out with your family?
So it didn't come as a surprise. It's interesting. I think
Does it ever? I feel like
Right?
that's always the response from family. Like, when were you gonna tell
we
us?
knew. I know.
Yeah.
I don't think I came out till 25 because I don't often have crushes or attractions necessarily, but the way that I love didn't come as a surprise to my family members. I did, just because I'm that person, make a PowerPoint for like my siblings and my parents to explain these different terms and things like that. Like, what is demisexuality? What is
Yeah.
pan? What is all of these things? And what are these spectrums and things like that? And I decided to just come out as queer because I feel like my identity keeps changing or growing or evolving, and I didn't want to be stuck to one particular label. But thankfully, even before I came out as queer, my parents had communicated very clearly that they value my mental and emotional health above like anything.
Mm-hmm.
So thankfully, there hasn't been too much strain. Like, we're walking together. So yeah, it's something that I've only shared. Like, I don't think that I necessarily hide it. It's something that I like to share, like, with my parents, with my siblings, with loved ones, and kind of gradual. So
I find that funny that you said that your family said what my siblings all said to me, where they were so upset when I finally told them and I came out at 26, and they were like, we have been waiting for years for you to say this. We all knew. And they would apparently do bets as to which one of them would ask me if I was gay, but they would always back out because they didn't want to lose a relationship with
Aw.
me. And they would always say, like, we were afraid you'd be mad at us and that you'd be upset or that we'd scare you away, so we just didn't. And like, I didn't realize the privilege I had of having a love that surrounded me, where they gave me the space to be myself. They didn't need the title to love me. And I was in my own head thinking that once I came out that I would lose it all. But
Yeah.
then they were in the same place, like, not trying to lose me. And it was very interesting to hear that. And I could only imagine myself doing a PowerPoint, because my mom doesn't even really understand this. My dad doesn't either. I used to work for the Utah Pride Center, and my mom and dad would be like, oh, the gay thing that you do. And I was like, yeah, my job.
that's funny. How did it feel when they said those things? Like, we've known, we just like didn't want to say anything. Like, how did that feel?
It was more so I felt embarrassed that I did not understand the love my family had for me, even though I knew the love I had for them to be unconditional, and that my family means so much to me. My siblings are my best friends, and my mom and dad are just the world to me. They're kind of like my kids in some sense. Once I got older and started to be able to financially support them, it really allowed me to help them. I would also come home and teach my parents things. My dad, I remember, would like prepare priesthood meeting classroom teaches or whatever lessons, and he'd read the ensign and would be like, what's this word? And I remember I was like, conscience. And he's like, conscience. And I was like, that's not the word. And then like we would talk about it. And I was like at 15 or something. And it was always like an open dialogue. And like we would teach each other. And once I got old enough where we were still having that conversation and then we had a great relationship, it was more so the shame on my end that I didn't expect them to be better than what I saw others be.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's because we see others that have very different experiences that we kind of have that hesitation or fear, because sometimes you don't know. But
yeah, and I definitely saw cousins who were trying to come out and weren't being received by their family well, and I just assumed that was the culture and that I wouldn't get that. But I mean, that's not. How's your relationship with your parents now? Do you keep in touch with them a lot?
When you mentioned that you kind of had experiences where you taught your parents, I was really touched when my parents shared things like that too. Like, like they've come to Encircle, they've come to some cultural humility trainings that I've presented at universities, and afterwards we'll share like what they learned or that they didn't know something about me, or that I'm teaching them things, and to hear that they'll discuss me at their work with their coworkers even is really humbling.
Yeah, it's always nice to see a family just like candidly speak about you proudly without you having to ask. Or I don't know if it was the same. I kind of felt like I was surrounded by like negative stories of like queerness and like hearing other people say bad things, but to hear my family say positive things where it's not solicited and that's just their feelings, it's always nice to know that it's genuine and pure.
Yeah. It seems like you're sharing a lot of either solidarity or positive experiences with your community, have you come across any challenges with feeling kind of at one with your environment and your community around you?
Like as if I was singled out, or
Yeah.
as if I was part of it?
Kind of both. I think I'm asking for where you feel part, but also where you feel singled out and what kind of bars you from feeling part.
Yeah, I always feel like my genuine self when I'm in like a fully queer space. That's my space, and that's where I
Yeah.
learned myself and was just with friends and just being catty and stuff like that. But I do feel like I don't have that really here in Utah. There's not very many queer spaces, and so that is what I truly miss. But out here, I do feel sometimes I stick out like a sore thumb, and I do sometimes. It wasn't until I moved to Utah where I started to find myself in spaces where I was the only person of color or the only queer person. I worked for a corporate office in the Silicon Slopes, and I was one of 400 employees, but I was the only person of color and the only out queer individual. And that was very exhausting to walk in the boardroom meetings and to lead meetings and to have conversations with people and to be kind of belittled and to realize that people just looked down on me because I didn't look like the rest of them. And it wouldn't be until they found out, oh, well, you were raised Mormon, and then they'd be a little kinder. They'd start to see like, oh, maybe I can relate to you in some way. And so it was very interesting. Have you found that that's your experience, or what spaces are you feeling welcomed in or singled out?
I think I have become so used to being either the only person of color or things like that in a lot of spaces. So it wasn't until I was able to step into a space where there were lots of other queer people of color that I felt like, whoa, like this kind of quiet understanding is what this feels like, to be in a room with other individuals like that. And outside of that, I just kind of get used to feeling like an island, essentially. And occasionally maybe I'll meet with a friend or someone new. But yeah, it can get, I think, I just get used to it, unfortunately, kind of feeling like the only one. But I mean, when you have either close family members around you or close friends or even kind of a grounded sense of self, I think you get used to that. But it is something that I hope kind of gets better in the future.
And you said the word solidarity. What does that word mean to you?
To me, solidarity means having some kind of unity in thought or in action or experience or emotion, something that kind of holds you together, even if you are diverse.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that. I think with everything that's been going on in the last couple of years, solidarity to me makes me think of like numbers and showing up in numbers and like the support that you get, whether physically like standing together at a protest or at a march or just banding together to have the majority vote. And to just make sure that everyone knows, like, no, this is right. It always reminds me of, like, being a kid and being the smaller, skinnier one and having my cousins step in when someone's picking on me. And just, like, that solidarity of having someone come to your defense and kind of say, like, no, this is love. This is normal. And this is how you show it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what advice would you give young queer kids of color?
I would first say that they are not alone, even though it feels like it. I always encourage self-love and self-care, because these intersecting identities can be exhausting, especially if you are the only one. So definitely making sure you take care of yourself. It's a little hard because for me, like, it's been so nourishing to create spaces like inviting some people to dinner or going on a road trip or things like that. When I finally meet someone, it's hard to socialize sometimes, though. I know there are different like temperaments and things like that, but when you do find people that have some similar cultural experiences in their queer identity or in their racial identity, and you kind of commit to like continuing to show up, the family, the chosen family that's kind of born out of that is so worth any kind of social anxiety, I think, personally for me.
Oh, for sure.
I found that, yeah. What advice would you give to young queer people of color?
Well, I'd first say just be gay. It's not
great.
like, sis, it's great. Like, come over and hang out with us. It's fun over here. But then I'd also remind queer kids of color that in the past, we have always been like regarded as like spiritual healers, as prophets, as fortune tellers, as like important individuals to the culture and to the community, and that we still are born with those innate gifts, even though society doesn't acknowledge them anymore. We still are those God-given spiritual healers. And like I definitely feel that when I'm surrounded by others like myself, that I do feel like there is this sense of aura and sense of love that cannot be explained or cannot be taught. It's something that I think us in this queer community just give, and that we just know. I think it's something that we've always trusted to let us know who we are, is our emotions, our attractions, our love, and what makes us feel happy inside. And I think that those things are true to who we all are, and I would just encourage queer people of color to just know that and to embrace that, to know that they are that important person, that they are that gift to society, and to be that shine.
Yes, I would just hope that they/we can learn to walk as if we are gifts to the earth, because we are, like you're saying. Like when I recently watched an interview with Alok Vaid-Menon, who's this
Amazing,
beautiful human who's coming to Slick next year, by the way.
I can't
just so
wait.
You know. So yeah, I'm so excited for Alok to come. But whenever I hear Alok speak, it's like, and like Alok has beautiful thoughts, but just Alok being essentially is what's transforming and I think healing themselves, but also people around them. And I think that's kind of part of the beauty again of being a queer person of color, and just settling into that and not asking permission or anything like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Right?
My favorite thing about Alok is that outside of like embracing your queer identity, they always introduce the idea of things that are very cultural, like where it is the history of your hair, the history of facial hair, and like women with facial hair. And like I find that just absolutely liberating to remind everyone that like you can look different ways. Because let's be honest, I definitely had the aunt with the mustache at church, and like it was that world that I lived in. And like it wasn't until I left like this fully Mormon Tongan bubble that I started to see that there were these standards of what a woman should look like, what a man should look like, and not just how they act. And so I always appreciate like anyone who sheds light on like the difference, the way we all are, and like our natural state, and how it's different from one another, and like how culturally some things are important, like how the natives value their long hair. And I find that so gorgeous, and that's something that also resonates in my culture, that long hair means something. But like, does it in all cultures? Does it truly like speak to your value? So
Beautiful questions.
how would you explain allyship to others who may not identify within the queer community, or even see themselves as, or be a person of color, and how would you encourage them to provide support?
I thought of an experience recently. I was at one of my work. I have multiple jobs. At one of my workplaces, they have introduced some kind of like dress code and things like that. And when I looked at it, I thought of Alok, and I was like, would Alok be able to work here? Or would someone who's gender nonconforming feel comfortable with this? And if not, I don't know if I want to work in a place like this, you know, like, because I want to be around people who are freely expressing themselves. And so what I mentioned that story to say is there's a lot that can be done to build a culture that welcomes people who are gender nonconforming, people who are not heteronormative, people who are interfaith, people like, I think there's so much that can be done culturally, and that takes like a multidimensional approach, right? Whether it's dress, whether it's decor, whether it's how the day is structured, whether it's what your values are, or the events that you're putting on. So many different things just to be insightful. And I think one of the number one things is who is at the table when you're making those decisions. Like, do you invite people who are different from you to the table to decide what is the culture, what are our values, what's our priority, how are we going to decide how to handle this issue? I think being invited to the table is one of the major important things for me.
Oh, definitely. A seat at the table and like a voice in the conversation means so much. But it has to be very genuine in regards that it's not only the access to the conversation, but it's the the true intent to listen and learn
And act,
from what's being
right?
spoken.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel like I've been part of tables or invited to tables and conversations where that's been the intent, but it's definitely felt like while I was speaking, there's been kind of like a few in the room that just kind of disregard it, that start to ignore me, that start to zone me out, that no longer are interested in the conversation. It's now taken a turn that they don't want to listen to, or they don't acknowledge because they don't understand it, or to them it comes across aggressive because it's something where it challenges what they know to be normal or to be okay. And that's what I would probably encourage, is that it is not an attempt to devalue you in the conversation. It's not an attempt to raise others above you. It's equality that we're looking for. We're trying to encourage a seat at the table, a voice in the conversation, so that we too can be heard and be part of it, not above it, not below it anymore. And so I would encourage those that are looking to make inclusive or safe spaces or provide allyship to do so genuinely and to listen and be part of the moment, because sometimes tone deafness is like, you don't know how to explain it to someone who doesn't get it, but to only ask them to be mindful of it and to pay attention to it with the hopes that they start to get it, but it doesn't always work. But I think the attempt is there, but just try to listen, try to be present a little more. I've definitely found myself in conversations where I've joined in and haven't start to receive backlash or a little pushback because the room predominantly doesn't look like me or doesn't agree with what I say. Have you ever been in a situation like that, and how have you tried to?
Yes. I'm thinking more of like different conversations with friends than sometimes a workplace even. It's interesting that there are some friends that I've been friends with them for 7 years, but we've never talked about race, essentially, or my queerness or things like that. And then when they do bring it up, it's with a lot of reason, like why this, why that, why this reaction, la la la, instead of, I don't even know how to say what I'm trying to say. You know, like you can sense or you can feel when someone's asking a question to become competent or to kind of debate or to like get some info versus to feel what your experience felt like. Or to really
learn.
Exactly, right? So I think I have memories of different conversations with a friend who like was truly humbled and like wanted to apologize for never stepping into that space with me and wanted to hear my experience, versus someone who felt really kind of agitated by like something like affirmative action or a sign that was put up in someone's yard or things like that. And there's a difference.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you're bringing up friends, because friends don't always make the best allies. And that's something that I had to learn growing up, that like I do have friends that are still devout members of the church, but they love me and embrace me. But some friends who have that I would assume would be more receptive to my lifestyle just aren't. And I think that's something that I've had to learn and recognize too when engaging with individuals, is what is their intent with having me in their life. And I started to find that I would make friends, and then somehow through the conversations they'd be always like, oh, I've never had a queer friend before. And then I felt, oh, is that what I'm here for? Is that why we're friends? Yeah. And so I definitely find that like not all friends are the best allies, and some friends are just great to chat with, great to be around, great to grab a coffee with, but you don't necessarily expect them to be the best ally for you in situations. And so finding someone who could really listen to you, who could really treat you like an actual person and not make it about your identity, about what you add to their picture or whatever it is that they want, it's very hard to find. But I think true allyship is genuine.
It is genuine, and it's ongoing, right? It's not a couple times a year or things like that, or on a certain holiday. It's a regular practice. Exactly. Not just Pride Month.
Yeah. I always love it when the friends pull out the rainbow and stuff like that, but I'm just like, what are we doing all year, y'all? Like, if you ain't meeting me at the club all year, we aren't hanging out. Exactly. You ain't a true ally. Exactly. Like, when was the last time we went out together?
True. I want to ask, what are some moments of queer joy that you experience?
I'd have to say I started to experience like true queer joy when I would be walking with my husband hand in hand in public at places. There was this memory that I have when we first got married. One of our first trips was Palm Springs, because I grew up in the area, and I had friends come to town, and we were walking down the street hand in hand to brunch. and there were a few couples on the sidelines at a restaurant on the patio while we walked by, and we started to overhear them speak, and like they started to chat to each other and say like, oh, look at that gay couple, they're so cute. And they started to give us like affirming statements where they didn't know we could hear, and like we started to hear the whisperings being like kind whisperings and not like what I was used to growing up where they were like not saying derogatory things. And that was the first time I felt like true queer joy, where I felt like the love of my life's hand in my hand, and walking in public and being just myself, dressed as I am, and having people just say like, look at that, that's love. And that was beautiful for me. Mm-hmm. What about you?
So many. I think about when I watch videos of different speakers who are queer people of color, like it's interesting how their identity informs their spirituality in a way that like totally matches mine, and we're on different parts of the country, you know what I mean? But I just love finding that that kind of similarity that we've been experiencing, and how we form our thoughts and our beliefs. That's been really cool when I just find a new like influencer that I love, essentially. I've had moments of joy, like I mentioned, where again, I see my relationship with my parents growing and evolving, and the questions that we ask together and the conversations that we're asking. One moment was where I was talking with my mom, and we were going back and forth about like my dating life and how this is so new for parents, and actually asking like, what are we afraid of? And just asking that question out in the open, even though that's kind of heavy and serious, that's joy for me, essentially. And I would also say, again, youth, seeing youth celebrate who they are and know who they are is so inspiring to me, essentially. So I love the fashion, like our dress. Oh my gosh, I'm just so delighted by it. It's just constant art that I'm get to look at. It's awesome.
I just also have to ask, because you mentioned it. Like learning dating and like having to learn this queer life and navigating this queer life, but not really having others like yourself really around until you had friends and stuff like that. You mentioned ALOC and you mentioned influencers and things like that. How was it that you learned to navigate this queer life?
Oof, I'm still learning it. How is it that I learned to navigate dating, essentially? Or
like just being queer and embracing yourself. Was there like, is there something that you turn to, like words of ALOC or like reading or something like? What is it that kind of helps you through your journey? I
always take a multi-dimensional approach. So words of Alok and other influencers, like Benny Cardulo is another one that I love, who's spoken here at Encircle a couple of times. Taking classes on sexuality and orientation, taking healthy relationships classes that are informed by queerness, podcasts, so helpful. So a lot of different things. And I'm even like doing a lot of writing and reflection, and all of that kind of helps me navigate it. And thankfully, when I meet different partners who are also flexible enough as I change and to talk me through this, that's been also so helpful. So I don't know if that was a straight, clear answer.
No, I really do feel like we have to grab what we can, and that's why representation is so important, because you do have to find yourself in books and movies and those around you and the words that are being said to you, so that way you can like take what you need from all these lessons that are being thrown at you. And I definitely agree. I would watch movies like Sex and the City was like my thing. I felt like I was going to grow up and live with like a bunch of my single girlfriends and just like live my life and like figure out this dating world and stuff like that. But it wasn't until I had my own circle of queer friends where we would go on our own dates, and then we'd call each other and have conversations about what we experienced and learn from each other's experiences, learn from each other's chats and what we were all going through, our conversations thing we would have at work or at home, and we would always turn to each other and be like, what's your opinion about this? Or what did you do? Or what would you do? And that conversation with a close circle really allowed me to like grab these lessons and discuss it with a group and kind of like feel normal. Exactly. And sometimes I also felt like encouraged to be the trailblazer. Like I was more comfortable with myself and going on dates, and my friends were very shy. And so I would go on dates and I would always learn these beautiful stories of these men who lived these interesting lives and that would come to terms with their sexuality at different stages of their lives. And like, I'd go back to my friends and would be like, I met this person and this was their experience. And we then started to like hash those out and pick it apart and take what we could from it.
Yeah, exactly. And along those notes, I love, again, how diverse the queer community is, like even in how we do navigate our relationships. And I've learned a lot, even from the asexual or aromantic community, where they're basing their relationships on things entirely different than the norm, right? Like, and how they're able to structure their own rules for their relationship and treat it individual. I've learned so much from that, actually. So, yeah.
Yeah, still learning as like I start to meet others that are like in these other spaces or identify differently. I'm just like, oh, I never heard of that. I didn't know that was an option. Or like I don't know how that works. And like, it's always wonderful to like just meet and continue to learn even at this age.
Absolutely.
Am I older than you?
I don't know. I'm
feel
29.
like I am. Oh, how dare you.
What?
I'm like 32.
Beautiful. Oh, wow. What is that?
Stop.
3 years?
Looking 15 and
oh my
everything.
gosh. I feel like we're the same age. It's fine. I've been telling people I'm like 30 for like 2 years now, and my sister has to remind me, like, Cam, you're not actually 30. You know that? I'm like, it just feels like my spirit's age. I don't know.
I have to say that I deliberately didn't wear glasses because I thought we'd look like twin sisters.
We probably would.
Yeah, I was like, oh, she got curly hair.
Oh, that's so funny. And I'm gonna say I almost wore a shirt that was more printed like that, so we'll just hang out like that. We'll just be twinners when
I downloaded TikTok, so now I have a mullet and a mustache. And like, whatever. I may be 30, but whatever.